So you see plenty of topics debated and shared online amongst fans on whether or not they think the Nintendo Switch is powerful enough to run modern day games. Is it a system that is lacking to the point that the system is to blame with why we don't get some of these major third-party releases that you see on consoles like Sony PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X? And very rarely we get Nintendo chiming in on a topic like this as we do today, because at their most recent annual gathering of the shareholders, this exact question was asked, and in today's video I want to go over their very interesting and confident response in where the Switch is at today in terms of power and whether or not it is holding developers back with their broader visions for games, and what, if anything, this could tell us in terms of what to expect from the next generation Nintendo console in the future. What's up, nation? Make sure you like, subscribe, and turn on your bell notification if you haven't already. And as mentioned, guys, today we are discussing the Nintendo Switch and specifically the power of the console, because as I'm sure you're all aware, the Nintendo Switch is now in its 7th year of sales. It has completed 6 full years of being available on the market as of March 2023, and in financial results terms, that equates to starting the 7th year of its sales cycle, which will wrap up in March 2024. And naturally, when a console has been on the market for that long, a lot of the shareholders who are invested into Nintendo are asking questions around maybe what's next, and if something isn't next right away, is the Switch powerful enough in their eyes today to not hold back developers with their broader visions that they may have for games? Because you might stop and look around and realize that games like Pokemon Scarlet and Violet release on the Switch, which have yet to get any kind of meaningful performance patch, and you can blame a lot of these poor performing Nintendo Switch games on the developers themselves, like Game Freak. Maybe they didn't know how to transition off of 3DS hardware onto something that's more capable, but they also wanted to create an open world experience, and you've probably seen plenty of the viral clips floating around online on just how broken those games were and still are, quite honestly, because outside of rendering less characters and Pokemon in on screen, they haven't done much in terms of addressing some of those performance bugs and issues. Not to mention, we see games that are supposed to be headed to the Switch and in some cases are entirely canceled or they're heavily delayed. Hogwarts Legacy being an example that right now is slated for a November release, but it was supposed to be out in the summertime. Marvel Midnight Suns was headed to the Nintendo Switch with a native version, but they chose to cancel that project entirely. And then you have entire franchises make it over to the Switch, like the Kingdom Hearts series, which would be a perfect fit for the Nintendo audience, yet it comes over as a cloud-only port. Clearly, some of those games could run easier than others on Nintendo Switch hardware, but is the hardware itself limiting what developers can do? And is that why we see some of these broken first and third-party releases, or games get scrapped altogether? Well, to first get on the same page with what Nintendo has said around this, let's quickly hop over to My Nintendo News and read through their detailed typed up article together. Nintendo believes the Switch's performance is good enough, though admits developers always want more. Shinya Takahashi, who has produced a number of classic Nintendo games over the years, has told investors that he believes that the performance of the Nintendo Switch is good enough right now and would say it's not lacking, despite the platform being in its 7th year on the market. However, he did concede that developers generally would like more horsepower to play around with. Takahashi went on to say that since the Nintendo Entertainment System, they have worked on pushing the potential of the consoles they create and have figured out how to make fun games with the constraints. The exact question reads as follows: I'd like to hear honest opinions of the developers about whether the hardware specifications of Nintendo Switch, now in its 7th year, are sufficient to bring all of their game ideas to fruition. Takahashi responds, as a game software developer, if you ask me whether Nintendo Switch has sufficient performance, I would say it's not lacking. However, game developers generally want more and will always want to incorporate a lot of elements that exceed the hardware limitations. Since the Famicom era, we have worked on how to fit these elements inside a framework with certain limitations, and our job is to figure out how to create a fun game within these constraints. I believe that some interesting content are created as a result of accommodating the limitations, and we have actually been able to make this happen. Koshida, Director Senior Executive Officer, then chimed in saying, we have been developing Nintendo Switch software for a long time and have used various methods to overcome performance barriers. Even now, the system developers are listening to game developers and continuously implementing initiatives to increase the smoothness and longevity of Nintendo Switch software development. So obviously that's a pretty blanket PR type of statement to this type of question. If you're somebody who is on the board that Nintendo trusts you to answer the questions to its shareholders, you're not going to have the type of response that says, yes, the Nintendo Switch is aged. Yes, we know the Tegra X1 is from 2015 originally, customized for the Switch and launched in 2017. And clearly developers are having a hard time getting their games to run on our platform. You're not going to get that kind of honesty and transparency at a meeting like this, but I do think that it is interesting to pull back the curtain a little bit and see within Nintendo's own view on things that they treat the constraints of the system that they have as an opportunity to develop unique gameplay ideas. And I do, to be fair, think that you can actually say that that's maybe some of what we saw with a game like Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. If they were to just create a more vast and expansive open world, which they did with things like the depths and the skies above, well, you would still have a very similar game to Breath of the Wild. So what did they do? They looked at what they could do in terms of Switch performance, and they chose to go in the route of physics-based puzzle solving and literally having options to build things that create options for you to solve puzzles that you probably shouldn't even be solving them that way. The amount of shrines I've conquered that I'm positive that I did them wrong, but just because the idea was there and I could build something to get me to where I needed to go, I was able to complete them, I'm sure, in a way that Nintendo did not intend. I think that this type of talent exists within a lot of the first-party Nintendo studios in terms of creating unique and fun gameplay experiences due to some of the hardware constraints. But when you talk about the rest of the game developers out there, your third-party developers that would like to have access to a user base of 125 million total units, it does become something of a hurdle where they either need to understand the hardware of the Nintendo Switch at such a deep level to get things running correctly, and hoops that they have to jump through to make sure that the game doesn't have game-breaking bugs and glitches and frame drops and stutters. They either have to have that in-depth knowledge of what they are working with, or when these games are planned initially for consoles like PlayStation 4, Xbox One, PlayStation 5, and Series X and S, and they don't have to go through those type of development hurdles at the core of the game, sometimes it's just not possible or worth it to spend development dollars to get the teams to port it over to the Nintendo Switch. It's a case-by-case basis. Some games can make it over easier than others. We actually have Mortal Kombat 1 to look forward to on the Nintendo Switch, and that's a modern console game that's coming out on the PS5 and Series X and S. However, there are plenty of other releases that we just know not to expect. Over the summertime, we saw games like Star Wars Outlaws featured. We know that that's not going to get a Switch version. Maybe whenever it comes to new hardware, it's something they can look into porting over later on, but it's clearly out of the scope of possibility for the hardware on the Nintendo Switch, short of a cloud version. So while Nintendo views its own power constraints as an opportunity to be creative, I think the other developers and companies that are on the sidelines looking in that would like to have games that can run effectively on the Switch are probably frustrated with the limitations of a Tegra X1, and that's probably where some of the developers always want more power. Well, sure, they want as much power to work with as possible, but there is such a thing as an industry standard for a generation, and I personally hope that Nintendo gets a little bit closer to that with their next console. I think that the hybrid form factor is still a genius and winning formula for Nintendo, but if they bring the core chipset up to somewhat of a PS4/PS4 Pro and Xbox One level in power, it will at least give them a fighting chance to get some of the modern games on the platform going forward. And if they are able to pull that off at a reasonable price point with reasonable battery life when it is in handheld mode, I think they have a much bigger winning strategy, and we will ultimately have to wait and see on what Nintendo has up their sleeves for next generation. But it is clear that the Switch is aging at this point in time, and Nintendo's staying positive and saying that the constraints on the systems make our developers get creative. But that's really where I want to hear from you guys at this point in the video, your personal thoughts and opinions on this question and response to Nintendo and the power of the Switch today. Are you on board with them and you definitely think it is a powerful enough console and it doesn't hold back developers, and if anything it makes their games better, or by putting constraints on their games they get more creative juices out of that? Or do you think this was something more of a on the stage PR type of response where they're just not going to throw the Switch under the bus and everybody looking around in the room realizes that, yeah, we're due for an upgrade in terms of the overall graphical capability of this console in terms of the games it can run? And bonus question, which third-party games that were announced over the summertime or even in years past that are coming out on the other platforms would you most like to see have a Nintendo Switch version that haven't been confirmed yet today? So regardless of your thoughts and feelings on everything we talked about today, I do look forward to hearing from you all in the comments down below before you leave the video, as I do look forward to getting a back and forth conversation started with you all around these topics. Go watch yesterday's video next if you haven't already, which is on screen right now. Also make sure you like, subscribe, turn on your notification bell, and I will see you guys in the next video.